before swords clashed and kingdoms crumbled, before the Witch King's shadow swept across the north, there was light, brilliant, noble, and born from the wreckage of a drowning world. In the year 3320 of the Second Age, Elendil the Tall, last of the faithful, landed upon the shores of Middle-earth with the remnants of Numenor at his back and destiny in his eyes. He did not come to conquer, but to rebuild. With wisdom earned through sorrow and fire, he founded Arnor, the north realm of the Dunedain, a kingdom of proud towers and silver banners. Nestled between river and mountain, where the blood of Westernesse still ran strong. At Anuminas, by the shimmering shores of Lake Ninuyal, the High King planted his banner. And from that banner unfurled a vision, a land where men could live in peace, under stars unmarred by shadow. It was a place of legacy, of learning, of wonder. But even in its birth, the greatness of Elendil's dream endured through his son Isildur, but not for long. The ring claimed Isildur, and from that moment on, the North Kingdom began to dim. What began as a refuge from destruction would, in time, be devoured by it. And so, Arnor entered the Third Age not as a roaring lion, but as a wounded stag, majestic, yes, but hunted by shadows. The banner of Elendil still flew, but the wind had begun to change. It was not the sword that first broke Arnor. It was pride. For nearly 1,000 years after Elendil's noble founding, the realm of the North stood tall against the winds of time. Its kings, descended from the line of Elendil, ruled with wisdom and strength, their people bound by shared blood and purpose. But with the death of King Eärendil in the year 861 of the Third Age, that fragile unity shattered. He left behind not one heir, but 3 sons, and where once there had been a crown, now there were ambitions. Arthedain, Cardolan, Rudor, 3 kingdoms born of the same lineage, yet divided by suspicion, rivalry, and the insatiable hunger for power. Each son claimed his own dominion, and the great kingdom of Arnor was torn into pieces, like a noble banner ripped by the wind. The Dunedain, once mighty and united, now looked upon each other with wary eyes. The land itself seemed to groan beneath the weight of their conflict. In the Weather Hills, the proud tower of Amon Sul stood as a prize all 3 sought to possess, not only for its commanding view, but for the palantir it housed, a stone of vision and knowledge, a key to dominance. Whoever held Amon Sul held the horizon. But this was more than a quarrel over thrones or stone fortresses. This was the slow bleed of a people who had once defied Sauron himself. Now, they were reduced to squabbling kings and contested borders. And in the silence between their wars, a new shadow crept in from the north. While the brothers turned against each other, a darker force stirred. The Witch King was watching. He needed no armies yet, only time. Time for men to forget their unity. Time for strength to decay into stubbornness. And as Arnor fractured, the storm began to gather beyond the mountains. And so the cracks widened, and into those cracks evil would pour. It began not with thunder, but with silence. Around the year 1300 of the Third Age, the winds shifted in the northern wilds. A presence stirred, slow, patient, and unseen. It was not a king who announced himself with fanfare, nor an army that marched beneath burning skies. No, Angmar was born in the hush between breaths, in the spaces men forgot to guard. Its rise was not loud, it was suffocating, in the bleak lands beyond the Etten moors, where the sun struggled to break the clouds, and even the trees seemed to lean away from the sky. A dark fortress was raised, Carndum. Black stone, frozen gates, a place where light went to die. And at its heart stood a figure not named in the tongues of the free peoples, a wraith cloaked in dread. He would become known as the Witch King, though few dared speak it aloud. He did not strike first with swords, but with whispers. His power seeped through fault lines already carved by man's pride. He saw a fractured Arnor, bleeding from within, and fed on that division like a carrion beast. Evil men, outcasts, orcs, and worse crept to his banner, not out of loyalty, but because they sensed something ancient, something cruel that promised dominion. Angmar grew like rot under a floorboard, unseen until the damage was fatal. The air in the north thickened. Travelers spoke of shadows that moved where no sun fell. The animals fled. The winds changed. And all the while, Rudor, once a Dunedain kingdom, fell quietly under the sway of the Witch King, its throne claimed by a puppet loyal not to his people, but to the shadowed will of Carndom. While the heirs of Elendil argued over stones and borders, the storm beyond the mountains coiled tighter. Angmar was no kingdom. It was a curse with a crown, and it had only just begun to spread. The silence didn't last. The first strike of Angmar came like a blade through fog, sharp, sudden, and merciless. The year was 1356 of the Third Age, and the Dunedain, fractured and wary, were unprepared for the storm that broke upon them. In the realm of Arthedain, a flicker of unity had been lit by King Arnor I, who sought to restore the lost honor of Arnor and claim sovereignty over the splintered kingdoms. Cardolan bent the knee. Rudor did not. For Rudor no longer answered to Dunedain blood. It answered to Angmar. The hillmen of Rudor, now under the Witch King's influence, joined the creeping dark. Together with the fell hosts of Angmar, orc legions, wargs, trolls, and men twisted by malice, they poured down from the north, their banners like ragged wings blotting out the sky. The Weather Hills, once a shield of watchtowers and stone paths, now bore witness to screams and fire. Argileb, valiant and unshaken, fought alongside his soldiers at Amon Sul, that proud tower built by Elendil himself. Its stones had stood for centuries, holding one of the sacred Palantiri, the seeing stones that once bound the realms of men. But valor alone could not match the fury of Angmar. In that bloody clash, Argileb fell, his sword no longer flashing hope, but lying broken among the dead. Yet hope was not fully extinguished. Arvleg, Argileb's son, rose in his father's place with fury in his heart and fire in his veins. He called upon old allies, and Certain, Lord of Linden, answered. Elven Vorish, tall and radiant beneath the stormy skies, marched beside men once more. Together, they pushed Angmar back from the hills. For a time, the frontier held. For a time, they breathed. But the message was clear. The Witch King would not stop. He had tested the walls of the north and found the cracks. When swords were sheathed and battlefields lay silent, a darker plague crept in, not of blade or arrow, but of breath and blood. In the year 1636 of the Third Age, a pestilence unseen and unstoppable swept westward from the lands of Run. It moved like smoke beneath doors, like whispers in dreams. The Great Plague, they called it, and it struck like vengeance made flesh. First Gondor reeled, and soon the north bent beneath its weight. Cardolan, already weakened by war and sorrow, bore the brunt. The proud Dunedain who still held fast in the Barrow Downs, ancient resting place of kings and warriors, were not fell by sword, but by fever. One by one, they fell into silence, and their tombs grew fuller. Yet the Witch King of Angmar did not let this death pass in peace. Where men saw tragedy, he saw opportunity. He came not to conquer, but to curse. Standing upon the windswept mounds of Tiwarin Gorthad, he spoke words in tongues long forgotten. He summoned spirits, not of this world nor the next, wraiths, cruel echoes of tormented souls. And with them, he desecrated the sacred. The Barrow Wights were born. These spirits did not rest. They clawed from their tombs, their voices deep and hollow, dragging the living into crypts of bone and shadow. Their touch was ice, their gaze a nightmare. The very earth recoiled. The wind wept over the haunted hills, and no torch could banish the chill that now lingered there. The Dunedain would not reclaim Cardolan. No warrior would raise a banner on cursed ground. The land became a graveyard that breathed, where time seemed to rot and the past refused to sleep. The Witch King had sealed it, not with fire, but with fear. Even centuries later, few dared pass those hills. For in Middle-earth, some places are not forgotten because they are sacred, but because they are accursed, in a world slowly unraveling. Hope does not always come as a war cry. Sometimes it comes as a whisper between two hearts. In the year 1940 of the Third Age, with the shadow of Angmar still thick upon the north and the Wainriders battering Gundor from the east, a bold union was forged, not upon a battlefield, but at the altar. Prince Arvedui, heir to the dwindling realm of Arthedain, took to wife Firiel, daughter of King Ondoher of Gundor. In that moment, two ancient bloodlines, one of Isildur, the other of Anarion, were bound together once more. It was more than love, it was legacy. Arvedui bore the line of Elendil, and Firiel, radiant and strong, carried the last breath of Gundor's royal house. When Ondoher and his sons fell in battle, just 4 years later, Gundor's throne stood empty. And so Arvedui, by right of blood and marriage, staked his claim to the kingship of both realms, north and south, dreaming that Elendil's lineage might once more be made whole. But dreams are fragile in a world of cold counsel. The Council of Gundor, led by Pelender, looked not to unity, but to strength. They saw Arthedain as a remnant, scarred, weak, insignificant. They crowned Arnor, a war hero and descendant of Anarion, and cast aside the rightful heir of Elendil. Still, Arnor was no arrogant usurper. He wrote to Arvedui with respect, acknowledging the kinship of their houses and swearing aid when needed. But words do not hold back armies. And as Gundor debated thrones, the Witch King sharpened his blade. The North would face its doom alone. This was the moment. The last thread of unity stretched thin across the ages, and then it snapped. What could have been a rebirth of kings became instead the prologue to the final fall of Arthedain. Hope had spoken softly, but war was already roaring at the door. Winter came, and with it the end. In the year 1974 of the Third Age, beneath skies choked with frost and sorrow, the Witch King unleashed his final blow. Arthedain, the last flickering flame of Elendil's dream, stood alone. Its people were few, its strength diminished. King Arvedui, wise and resolute, knew the storm could no longer be weathered. From the black halls of Carndom, the armies of Angmar descended like a tide of ruin. Orc legions, wolves, and men with hearts long corrupted by shadow. Their target was clear, Fernast, the once proud capital of the north. Its towers had gazed for centuries over the lands of the Dunedain, a symbol of defiance. Now it trembled. Arvedui called for aid, sent word to Gundor, to Círdan, to anyone who might still remember the old alliances. But winter is long in the north, and help moves slowly through snow. Among the defenders were not just soldiers, but hobbits, brave in heart, if not in stature. They came not for glory, but for gratitude for the land that had sheltered them. They stood on the walls with bows in hand, shoulder to shoulder with the last of the Dunedain. And when the Witch King's horde surged from the darkness, they did not yield. But courage is not always enough. Fernast fell. Its walls buckled under fire and fawn. The streets ran red with the blood of kings and commoners alike. Not a single hobbit survived. Arvedui, his hopes shattered, gathered what remained of his guard and fled north into the frozen wild. There, with the wind howling like a mourner, the kingdom of Arthedain died, not with thunderous defeat, but with a silent, bitter breath. The realm of Elendil was no more, and all that remained of its legacy was carried in exile on the shoulders of a king with no crown. The north had fallen. Fernast lay in ruin, the line of kings scattered, and the Witch King sat like a blight upon the throne of Arthedain. But from the distant south, a promise stirred, a vow made in honor, forged in blood. King Ernil of Gundor, though too late to save Arvedui, would not let his word rot in the snow. He summoned the strength of the south, and from the shipyards of Gundor rose a fleet like the world had not seen in an age. Black sails, proud and terrible, cut across the sea like a storm gathering vengeance. At their head rode Prince Arnor, fierce and unflinching. With him came warriors of Gundor, noble princes of Rovanion, and riders whose horses were swift as wind and eyes sharp with fury. They sailed not into conquest, but into reckoning. When their ships landed in Lindon, certain the shipwright raised the banner of war, calling forth the elves of Lindon, Rivendell, and Lothlorien. Even the hobbits, quiet and steadfast, answered once more, marching not for glory, but for love of hearth and home. Together, they formed a host of the West, an alliance of vengeance and light. And they did not strike for Nos directly. Instead, they turned to the hills of Evendim, laying a trap for the Dark Horde. When the armies of Angmar emerged, arrogant in their recent victories, they were met with steel, fire, and fury. The West descended like a wave of judgment, and Angmar broke beneath its weight. In the chaos, Arnor led a daring cavalry charge, splitting the retreating army and forcing them into a rout. And when the Witch King himself turned to face him, cloaked in terror, it was Glorfindel, elf lord of old, who rode forth with moonlight at his heels. The Witch King fled, not defeated but marked by prophecy. Not by the hand of man shall he fall. And so, vengeance was fulfilled, and the dark crown of Angmar was cast down. The North was free once more, but its cost would echo for ages. Though the Witch King was driven from the North, there would be no great coronation. No banners raised above or rebuilt for Nost. Arthedain was gone, its cities crumbled, its fields scorched, and its people scattered like ash on the wind. But from the ashes, something deeper took root, not a kingdom, but a calling. The blood of the kings did not perish with Arvedui. His son, Arnor, survived, but he would not rule from a throne. He took no crown, claimed no scepter. Instead, he became the first of a new line, the chieftains of the Dunedain, guardians of a kingdom that existed now only in memory. The remnants of the North Kingdom did not vanish. They became shadows in the trees, watchers on the hills. They were the rangers of the North, unseen, uncelebrated, and unyielding. They bore no sigils, but carried the weight of ancient blood, walking forgotten paths to protect those who no longer remembered the price of peace. While the world forgot the name of Elendil, his heirs walked in silence, ghosts of nobility in a land that had turned away from glory. Their sons were not raised in the wild alone. They were sent to Rivendell, to the house of Elrond, where the old wisdom lingered and the light of the Eldar had not yet dimmed. There they learned of Numenor, of Gil-galad, of hope unbroken. And within Elrond's halls were kept the heirlooms of the West, the ring of Barahir, the shards of Narsil, and the scepter of Enumenes, symbols of a crown not yet reclaimed. So they waited, they watched, they guarded, until at last, from this quiet line, came one who would bear it all, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, 16th chieftain of the Dunedain, the Lost King, the hidden flame. And when he rose, it was not only Gondor that rejoiced, but Arnor, long silent, whose voice at last was heard again in the wind. From the noble rise of Arnor to its tragic fall, the story of the North is one of light battling shadow, of pride giving way to ruin, and of forgotten heroes guarding a fading legacy. Through shattered kingdoms, cursed lands, and relentless war, hope endured, not in crowns but in quiet courage. The Dunedain became whispers in the wild, preserving a lineage that the world had left behind. And in the end, from the silence of the North came a king, Aragorn, heir of Elendil, who would reunite the realms, restore the flame, and fulfill the promises whispered across 1,000 years.